Hello, everyone. This is Armando Perez-Carreno, and welcome to the Web Talk Show. Today with us is Richard Heayes from 7 Pips and Heayes Design. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about today's show because we're going to talk about toys, games, game design, and I think it's a great topic for anyone listening because in my experience, it's just I don't know anything about what happens behind the scenes. We love the games, we love the toys. If you have kids, then you see the other side. So hopefully Richard will give us some behind the scenes glimpses into what it means to be in the toy industry. So, Richard, let's start off with how did you get started in games and toys? What was your foray into all this?
There's a quick story. So I trained as an industrial designer. So if people don't know industrial design is basically designing all the things that around you. They all need designing, and that job is basically industrial design. Um, my first job was working for a plastics company. We did sort of housewares, buckets, bowls, that kind of stuff, storage boxes, which is all fine, but pretty boring. I'll be honest with you. It was my first job out of university, and it was pretty boring. And then one day we were working on a box, and I designed a pirate lid to this box. It was like a standard box, and we designed a pirate lid, and it went to testing, and the reaction was really positive. Like the parents were, because normally it was talking about things like, "Oh, how cheap is it?" or I don't like the color," or just really mundane questions. Whereas this, there was no questions about the color, the price, or anything. It was like, "Oh, it's a cool pirate chest. Oh, I wish I had a pirate chest when I was a kid. Oh, does it come with coins?" And all these kind of questions. I was like, "Oh, well, that's interesting. I haven't heard those kind of reactions before." And it kind of dawned on me. It didn't. It kind of dawned on me later, but at that moment, it was like, "Wow, this is interesting. Why are people reacting in this kind of way?" And obviously, it's about experiential design, how you talk about it these days. It's people caring about your product and not just seeing it as a commodity item. And the thing with toys is they have an emotional hook, which is everybody wants their products to have. It's really tugs on your heartstrings. It's something that you get excited about, and you don't really worry about the price. You don't really worry about all those things that you worry about with other things. So anyway, that was from there. I realized that toys are my thing. I wanted to design more products like this that get those kind of reactions. And I eventually I worked at a giftware company for a short period of time. Well, 4 years, 5 years actually. And then from there, I got a job at Hasbro, and I was at Hasbro for 18 years.
Wow.
So My Little Pony, Play-Doh, micro machines, outdoor things, and then games, lots of games. So yeah, which we'll probably end up talking a bit more about. But yes, that's how, but from a design, basically from a design point of view how I got in there. But yeah,
Nice.
I think the people who tend to stay in toys as well who are in toys tend to stay in toys. It's very
Mhm.
hard to leave once you're in, because it's kind of nothing else kind of quite matches up actually.
Do you think it's because of that feeling of satisfaction of seeing the kids or even the adults actually play with it and enjoy it versus uh, other things?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think, there's obviously a lot of, I'm very conscious of kind of the environmental factor of toys. And that, look, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of chutch, there's a lot of toys which are kind of like plastic landfill. But I've never really worked on those, and I kind of wouldn't. Um, but actually, most toys, and particularly games we work on, there is a strong emotional hook. And, particularly with games, I've got probably all your listeners think about if they've got any kind of games at home. They're probably kind of games, or maybe their parents' houses. They've got kids games they played when they were a family. You don't tend to throw them away. You keep them because they become memories. They become stories in their own right. People have got these old Monopoly boards with completely ragged and stuff, but when they play them and they get out at Christmas or whatever, it's those memories, that they have. The dog who chewed the corner, or this something spilled, whatever. They are storyboards for you, and that's why they have that emotional hook. And there's just very few products as consumers that have that hook. Most products we have these days are very disposable. We have them a few years, they break, we throw them in the bin. Toys and games generally are not. You tend to keep kids' toys that you had. You're very reluctant to throw them away. Oh, I could pass them down to my grandchildren, all this kind of stuff. So if you build a good quality product, like they will last way, way longer than most products we buy, types of products we buy as consumers. So from my mind, there's an ecological product. That's kind of that, doesn't matter what it's made of, how many times it's recycled. Just don't throw it away and just keep it for a very long time. And that's surely what an ecological product is.
I'd never considered that, but it's very true. Unless, of course, you start moving and everyone starts dispersing, but if your parents keep sort of the same house for a few years, all the toys are there. You come back after many years, they're still there. The boxes even. So for the environmental factor, you're saying with toys, it's this weird thing where we keep the boxes, and that's where you put it. You could put it in a container, but you sort of keep the Monopoly box with everything inside and the little manual and
The whole, well, obviously a game particularly, yes, but even toys, you obviously toys, you perhaps throw the packaging away, but the toy itself you don't. And again, people keep them or they give them to friends and family,
hmm
or they take them down a charity shop, or they often get recycled within the community, a good quality product. And yeah, I was saying there's a lot of cheap toys which, aren't quite great, and we try, but they're gradually filtering out, to be honest, because they're just costing too much to make those things. So anyway, we won't talk about eco, but obviously it's a thing I consider about, especially these days, when you're designing products of any type of product, you sort of become a bit more mindful of its impact. No one wants to see your product on a beach in 20 years, washed up in bits, contaminating the planet. Yeah, that's not a great feeling. Um, so that's kind of, but ultimately it is the joy that it brings. They are joyful products and they're fun to work on. They are generally fun. They're not all easy. Toys and games isn't like any, it's a lot of it is grind like any other business. It's getting to the right cost and getting to if you're selling or licensing an idea or getting it through the supply chain, it's still tough. But ultimately, the product that comes out at the end of the day is something that people kind of generally care about and have an enjoyment from, and it brings a positivity when people kind of interact with it, whether that's a toy and a child or a game with a social group. So.
games are very unique, like you were saying, because I remember playing Monopoly as a child, and that's a game that has been around. We all know the perfect history, of course, which you can tell us in a bit, but it's been around, and it still has that. If I go to Target or a store here in the US and there's or anywhere and there's Monopoly and there might be just a new version of Monopoly with special characters or with silver little things or what, it's still you're interested in it. Even though I might not play it right now, I see the box and it still calls to me and I'm, oh, that special edition looks so fun. And it's the same exact game. Same gameplay, really, but it still calls you. So that it just has so much value, and I imagine there's all this work that happens behind the scenes, concept design, and we'll get into some of this stuff. But how does something like this start? A game, there's an idea. How does what happens before a game is made? I'm very curious as to, it's like something like Monopoly, the original one, for example. Do you know how that came about, or a similar game? How do they begin?
Monopoly's got an interesting story. It was designed as a kind of anti-monopoly kind of game. It was called the Landlord's Game, and it was kind of the antithesis of what it is today. And then at the time when that came out, there was lots of companies doing different things in different states in the US, because this obviously did start in the US. And there wasn't these kind of national brands that you had. So there was people doing games in the East and the West and Central and stuff. And Monopoly is actually one of those first products which became a kind of product, a consumer product that was the same product across the US. And it was done by Charles Darrow. Charles Darrow basically picked up the game mechanic, and again, other people were doing kind of similar kind of like games like Monopoly, or a simple board, a roll of the dice. Because you have to remember property, obviously, the idea of when Monopoly's 90 years old this year, by the way, which is kind of incredible. Because trying to think of how many, if you look at a Monopoly board, it's not, if you go back to, okay, the original was actually a round board, bizarrely. But if you go back to, you know, 60, 70, 80-year-old Monopoly board, it's not that different really to how it is today. And there's very few consumer products, you know, that are like that in their core product, you know, their core form. So yeah, so obviously everyone's excited about property and owning property. And so it just, again, it just taps into a dream. It taps into something that games often do, that they tap into other things. So, you know, whether it's Magic the Gathering and tapping into wizards and orcs, and it's just a fantasy world, whereas this taps into a real world, or, sorry, taps into a real world of owning property and earning money and doing well. And, you know, you know, you can just play out your fantasy in a game of Monopoly. So that's really kind of what most games are, really. They tap into something that, you know, is a fantasy, or something that you'd like to kind of imagine you could do, you know, or you know, also in a, or, you know, like Pandemic, which is a really big ball game. You know, what happens in this scenario? Could I stop the bugs infesting the planet? You know, so you just take on a role, you take on a personality, and you often find the most successful games are like that.
Wow. 90 years. And you're right, it's very similar. Even the additional additions that they make, it's sort of the same thing. But you said it was round at some point? Was it the
Yeah, the
board?
original one was round. Yeah, the board was round. The very
Interesting.
first one, but then Charles Darrow did it, and they turned it into a square board. And we did a round board version when it was the 70th, so 20 years ago, the 70th anniversary. We designed a round board version. Um, but yeah, they've always been square.
Nice. And then it
But
was
generally,
so
Monopoly.
go ahead.
No, no, no. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry,
No,
there was a small
I
delay.
think
Sorry.
we had a bit of a delay there. So no, I was gonna ask. It's such a fun game, but it's sort of on a longer time horizon for playing, right? And so then the Monopoly Deal game came along, and what was your involvement in that, and how did that start? How I remember you told me the story a few years ago, but and it's very interesting. So how did that start? How did it come about?
Well, it's really interesting, Monopoly, because obviously it's Monopoly is a great product, but is it the best game in the world? No. There's 3,000 games launched a year. People just don't realize how many new games launched out. But Monopoly has a, you know, it glues people together. People think they know how to play. In fact, most people don't know how to play Monopoly. They play it wrong. And that's the reason it takes 2 or 3 hours to play a game of Monopoly. There's world championships of Monopoly every sort of few years. And most of those games finish in 50 minutes or less. And it's because the way you're supposed to play Monopoly is that when you roll anybody, if it's your turn, Armando, and you roll and you land on a property, that property goes up for auction. If you don't want it, then other people can bid for it. Now, most people don't, it's in the rules. People don't read the rules. So what most people do is you would roll, you'd land on a property, and you'd go, do I want it? No, no. And then there's the next player's turn. Well, the problem is the chances of landing on the property you want to land on is very small. So that's why the game lasts forever. Whereas if every property goes up for auction and you don't have to pay, you could say, oh, I'll pay $10 for this $300 property. You know, I'll have it for $100. So, or two, and it might sell for more because you might have a set. So and it's actually a much more exciting game when you play it by the rules. But getting onto Monopoly Deal, because most people don't play Monopoly properly, the thing is how there's a lot of, we wanted to kind of boil down all the fun bits of Monopoly into 20 minutes into a card game. How do you capture the physical elements like the property and the go to jail and all that kind of stuff? How do you get the sniping, you know, when you've landed on, I'm going to charge you rent, you know, I'm going to really screw you over. How do you get that? But rather than dragging on and kind of festering for 2 hours. How do you get that into a fun kind of 20-minute? And so Monopoly Deal was born out of that. So we designed that in Europe, and it took 6 months to design actually a card game. People think card games are very simple. Some are, but actually, despite they're just bits of paper, this is the big difference with the game: is that a toy is what you see is what you get. So toys are often plastic or they're three-dimensional, and so you look at them and you play with them. They have a feature, something might pop out or whatever. But you get the idea. You know, something with a game, you could look at a game and you could look at Monopoly Deal. It's 55 or it's actually 110 cards, just playing cards. Okay, it doesn't tell you anything really. You couldn't interact with it. You need the rules. So there's a game mechanic behind it, and that's the magic. The game mechanic, not physical mechanic, the game mechanic, and that's the invisible layer over every game, and that's the bit that makes it a game. Um, and so the rules took a long time to rewrite and write and test, and because we wanted them to be very succinct. Because the problem with this, and this does affect like other brands, is that people are coming into Monopoly Deal with baggage because it was such a well-known game. People came in with an assumption of how it plays. So we couldn't break that. We couldn't, we had to sort of work with what people's expectations of the game probably were, because we know they wouldn't read the rules properly. So they kind of, we ended up crafting that and again tweaking it. But yeah, we actually made some test copies because the biggest problem was within Hasbro actually selling the idea, because it's trying to sell anything into a big company's hard, especially when it's just a pack of cards. It's like not very sexy. Yeah, here's some cards. And the games team would often follow the Nerf team. And the Nerf team would come in with their new blasters and shoot the room up with darts and get everybody kind of crazy and everything. And then we walk in and go, hey, look at my new cards. And of
Okay.
course the move, it's just so in order to get over that, we made 100 test packs and we gave them to all the top execs from all the different countries to play. We said, hey, look, do you want to be, because let's be honest, everybody who works at a toy company, whether the CEO or everybody, they all want to be a toy designer. Really, secretly, they'd rather be a toy designer. So we gave them the opportunity to be a designer. We said, look, we've got these games. It's secret. You know, it's just in development. So we really need you to test it and give us your feedback and be part of the design process. So basically, what we had is that all these execs around, playing it and enjoying it because we liked it. It was a good game. So when we came in and said, oh, we had all these people in the audience. Yeah, I've played that. That's really cool. That's a great game. And suddenly they were selling it for us. They were just doing the job for us. We didn't have to sell it. And that worked really well. And that managed to internally get the product over the line and get it promoted, because that's the hardest thing with any new product. We might believe in it, but if the country's marketing teams, the sales teams don't believe in it, it'll just bob along and then it'll just fall off and you'll never see it. You'll never get to play it. You'll never get to experience it. So it's really important that the internal teams have that, because like with any new product, when you're launching any new product in any industry, it's an uphill. You got to push it up. You got to push, get traction, get people interested, and then obviously you can start rolling and rolling and rolling. So I think that's a really good lesson actually from that you could apply is to whatever product you've got. I know it's not always a toy in a game and they can't test it, but try and get people engaged, especially in the design process, because that's quite motivational for people. Um, and when you're selling your product, don't, a lot of companies focus on the end consumer, which is very important, but it's really, really important to your internal people focus, and because they're ultimately doing the selling for you to get to your customers to then get that ball rolling. And if they don't believe in it, it will show. It will just show straight through, and you'll never get that product over the line, or it will just fade away. So
I think that's a great point. The buy-in from the internal people in the company and the sales representatives, and I this brings up a very interesting question, at least for me. We as consumers just go to the store and buy the thing, but how does it get there? So something like Monopoly Deal is made, you get buy-in from the internal team. Everyone loves it. Okay, so then I imagine there has to be some sort of sales process where they
Well, that's
talk
the
to the
buyers.
stores, or how does that
Well, that's the
work?
thing you've got to buy. So example, the Target and the Walmart buyer, are very important people because they control a huge amount of volume in the US. And often, we would even globally to some extent, like we would design products for the global marketplace. And one of the well, I ran the team in Europe that did that, but we designed certain bits for the whole world. But if the Target buyer or the Walmart buyer didn't like it, that would have a big impact on volume, on global volume, which might jeopardize the product globally. Because, you could say the Walmart buyers maybe taking 50% or 40% of the global volume. Well, that affects tooling, it affects investment, it affects lots of things. So those people are very powerful, actually, and it's really important to sell into them because often if they don't like it, you'll never see it. You might see it somewhere else, of course. You might find it at a different store. But the sales teams, as I say, it's really important that, and quite often what we would do, even in Europe, what would happen is, again, going back to toys and games, toys are very much what you see. They're kind of easier to sell in the sense that what you see is what you get. Whereas with a game, it is a much harder selling process because no, you can't, when the buyer comes round and they had walk around your showroom, you're not going to play the game with them. You've got to sell this game in 10 seconds, in 15 seconds. And often what we'd end up doing is the designers would end up selling the product to these big buyers because we really knew the products inside out and they were harder to sell for the sales guys, particularly and girls. If they were really into games, it's not something they can just look at and memorize. They really have to memorize, like remember how this game works, because the buyers will call them out on it. And often you'll find buyers in games particularly go, what happens if I do this? And if you don't know the rules of the game, you won't be able to answer that question. Because it's like asking you, well, how does that gearbox work? Oh, well, I don't know, there's a thing you pull. I'm not sure. It's like I can see the gearbox. What's that gear there? What's that little gear? I don't know. It's a spinny gear thing, and you'll look like an idiot. Whereas, and it's the same with the game. People might look at it and go, what's that? If I pick this card up, what does that do? What does that mean? Pick up two and give three. It's like, it's the same thing. It's that game mechanic thing I was talking about. So often the designers would pitch those ideas because that is such an important process because you spend all of this time internally working on these ideas, spending money on them, time, effort, sweat, blood, tears. If you fail to sell it to the buyer, all of that's kind of for nothing. Yeah, okay, I said there will be other buyers, but particularly your big important buyers, they are very important meetings. So yeah, once it's obviously on the shelf, you'll tend to find like in a Target or Walmart, particularly, or stock, they might do a test. So they'll pick a certain amount of stores to test it in, and then if it does well in those stores, there will be a national rollout. And the same thing happens in Europe. Sometimes you'll get an instant hit. This is fantastic, and obviously Monopoly is slightly different when you've got such a heritage brand. If you're a small startup or a new company and you're coming in with your new product, that's a hard sell because they don't know you, you've got no history, and they would certainly most likely do a test for you in a few stores to see how it goes, and then it would kind of roll out if it met the expectations of the sales targets.
I wouldn't have expected it, but it makes total sense. So these buyers actually know products well. They know toys, they know
They
games.
should do that. They
And
hopefully.
so, well, they should. But from what you're saying, it's not like, hey, I'm just gonna pitch you something and I'm a salesman or saleswoman and if I'm good at selling, you'll get it. No, these people know their stuff and they're gonna call you out if they're actual practitioners or whatever. They actually play games, I imagine. Well, some of them.
Well, you tend to find that buyers don't always like you'll find specialist stores who will have buyers who really have been in their specialism for a very long time. But often you'll find buyers move around. So they might start on something, they might start on fashion, then go into toys, then go on to home electricals. And obviously they've got to do the research. You tend to find these buyers do move around. They don't always stay within that's their specialist area. It depends by retailer, I think. There obviously are particular retailers who have buyers who have been there a very long time, and they're very, very, very established. But the bigger the companies, like the Walmart's, Targets, they're career buyers. These people don't necessarily want to do these buyers for games for years and years and years. They want to go off and do they end up on luxury watches, or I don't, there's obviously a path of products they really like to sell. Um, so yeah, it's but yeah, that's obviously the process of getting, obviously designing a product. And because obviously what's interesting is the design team, we're at the very, very start of the process, and the selling to the buyer ultimately, okay, it's not the final part of the process, it's the final part of the journey to it happening in your product. Obviously there's people involved in logistics and shipping and manufacturing, which is a continual after process. But that sort of design to sell is quite a satisfying thing as a designer, when you get to sell as well, because you're always selling. Design is a continual selling. You're selling to your team, you're selling to engineers, you're selling ideas, you're selling what ifs internally all the time. People don't often think of design as a selling job, but it really is a selling job. Like most jobs, like every job has an element of selling in, but because you're selling, you're trying to get people to buy into an idea which is you're not yet fully formed. Some people struggle with that. It's like, well, I don't really get it. It's not. It doesn't look really good. No, because it's not finished. Or can you? So you're constantly trying to sort of sell a kind of a concept until it sort of forms itself into something a bit more finished. And the Monopoly deal was a kind of classic example of that. It's like, um, it was hard. Well, do we want to sell a card game? It's only going to sell for like $6. There's not much money in that. I don't think we should do that. Well, what if we sold 1 million? Yeah, still not that much money though, is it? And so you've really got, it's like, oh, I could sell a board game for $20, and maybe we should be doing that. So you've got to, all those kind of basic arguments you've got to sort of think through. But ultimately, Monopoly was designed. I honestly don't know how long ago we designed it now, but it's still selling. It's sold millions and millions of units, and it will probably continue to sell for years and years and years. It's as good as, it's like an Uno in that respect. It's just out there. People like it. They recommend it, and that's the thing. That's the other thing with games is people recommend the products. If they really like them, they really will recommend them. And social media has been a very powerful tool for toys, for games particularly, because it's something that people love to share. People like to share positivity. They don't like to share, they don't share negativity on social media generally. You like to share positivity. So playing a game and having fun is a positive thing. And you like to spread the love. So,
That's amazing. The game part, like the Monopoly deal, for example, and Uno, we see them at the stores. They're just there. They don't even have to have these amazing setups anymore for them because, like you said, people they're a known brand now. So oh, I need an Uno. I'll just grab one because it's there, and I get it, right. But it's this makes a lot of sense because it might sound like it's not gonna be a big deal, like you're saying, yeah, $6 or whatever. But if you think about it, just from a business perspective, it's you put all this effort, 6 months, 1 year, many years, whatever, to make it and create the game mechanic, and that's the hard part. But once you have that and it's been sold and people bought into it and you like it, once it starts selling, you now have that IP for it. And it's just a pack of cards. It's printing and cutting and packaging.
I
But
know.
it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You think of food products, you think of like a lot of food. Now, getting a new food product to market is really hard. But if you look at a basic food, once you get it over the line and you've done all that
hmm
work and you can establish it like an Oreo or something,
hmm
you can just make a huge factory just to churn them out, churn them out. And yeah, okay, you've got to keep control of, and that's obviously the fact that that's the goal for any company who's manufacturing a product, or
hmm
even a service, but probably a product more so, is to have something successful that you don't even have to change. Because that's the challenge. Obviously, if you're in the technology market, you're in a product, if you're in a category which is very in need of constant innovation, which the toy industry is. But on the other side, you can find these products, which, and particularly they are games. Toys tend to be much more in and out, fashion led, brands, licenses, all this kind of stuff. But games, and that's why a lot of companies still do games, because if they can find that little magic game that they can seed in, they can sell. We call it a cash cow. It just sells and sells. It's just very little marketing spend. It just sells out year after year after year, and that's great. That's every company would love those kind of products.
Hmm. And especially the ones that then create a community around them. So you
Totally.
mentioned Magic the Gathering. So that game, you'll probably tell me I have no idea, but it started, from what I understand, it was a relatively small thing at the
Oh,
beginning,
yeah,
and then it blew up into this thing where there's a huge community, people,
yeah.
there's tournaments, there's the cards, but then there's a collectible space around it. And how did that happen? Is it just it got
Oh, it's quite.
popular,
Yeah,
and
it's quite.
or is
No,
it
it's quite clear how it
designed?
happened. Really, it's because if you went back to like Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering,
Hmm.
go back to the 80s, sort of 90s, before social media, yeah, there was people who liked it. It was seen as very geeky, and it was not something that you'd particularly bring up in social conversation, that you like pretending you're a wizard and killing this and summoning dragons and all this kind of stuff. But people like doing it. It's like Lego, it's the same thing. So this brings on to the big trend in toys, which is kidults. We call them kidults, but adults purchasing toys. And Magic the Gathering is primarily an adult purchase, and that's what's driving the toy industry. So Lego sales, an example. Lego, if you go back 20 years, their sales to adults was tiny, like a few percent. Now I would say it's probably at least, I don't know this, but my guess is based on how much product they're putting out, it's got to be close to 30% of their sales to adults. And by high value, those big Death Stars,
Mm.
those big sets you see in, they're not designed for kids. $300, $400. They're not designed for kids. And what I'm getting onto is social media. So the reason that these things are popular is that you get celebrity sharing on social media, celebrities, but suddenly it's become socially acceptable. Suddenly, oh yeah, I'm not a geek. I'm not some sort of weirdo. I really like playing Lego. I'm going to go buy some Lego because David Beckham does it, or whatever this celebrity does. And I'm going to play Magic the Gathering because I've seen the Hollywood star. They've been playing Magic the Gathering. It just becomes socially acceptable, and then great. I get full license to go and spend $300 on Magic the Gathering cards. So yeah, and just be a kid again. Because let's be honest, here's the other thing that's going on. The world's a tough place at the minute. There's a lot. It has been for a little while. There's a lot going on. It's the world. The other side of social media is not always great. There's a lot of pressure on adults. And actually, if you can sort of become a kid again, not in a silly way, but just that playful side of us, which was inherently a really important part of all human beings. If you don't have playfulness in your life, it kind of can get pretty low. Playfulness is about connection with other people. It's about happiness and positivity, generally speaking, and exploration, all those kind of things. This is what encourages adults to do. So yes, it might be seen as trivial, but actually, when you're building a big Lego set, it's quite therapeutic actually. Bit of mind time. It's kind of just a way you're just very much focused on the thing. And when you're playing Magic the Gathering, you can sort of put the world, if you're really kind of in that world with the dragons, the orcs, and so it's like, I'm in this world. I'm just going to let the outside world kind of take its place. And that's really what they are. It's very different to watching a TV show or really good. So getting involved, or theatre, just getting into something that kind of takes the outside noise away. But the great thing with games is they're relatively expensive. Yes, you can go to the theatre and pay a couple $100, or you can pay $20 or less, and have that experience for a lot less. And so that's really the big growth, and then continued. And you see that across the spectrum in fandom, in adults collecting. like Funko Pop, those kind of
Hmm.
toys. You might have
Oh
Funko
yeah.
Pop. There's so many things out there that are appealing to that demographic now.
That's very interesting. And the whole magic thing then went, and Dungeons and Dragons. Then there's the whole certification thing that then happens, and then people start reselling the card, not to play the game. And I recently heard this from someone in that side of the industry, that there's a when you talk about table card games, right? Tabletop card games, there's a certain percentage, big percentage of people that don't play the game. And it's a big chunk of the economy of the game where they don't actually play the game, but
Exactly.
they it's all around the community and the collectibles side of thing.
Well, that happened over COVID a lot because you saw a massive spike in like Kickstarter campaigns.
Hmm.
People had, all those kind of $100, $200 board games with crazy amounts of miniatures and crazy amounts of, nothing you'd ever find in store.
Hmm.
And these are being bought up, and then once that kind of ended, you had all these people with literally games they'd never played. They just bought them because it's just a thing they wanted to have, um, which isn't great, obviously. You should be, but also as an investment. There's got like toys are and games are very collectible, and if you find the right one, gold, going back, not sort of going bang like Lego here, but there was a point where Lego was more valuable than gold. Not at the minute because gold's gone up, but basically there were Lego sets that you could buy that over the course of 5 years made more money than gold, on their return, because they were just super super collectible. So you could pay like $100 and suddenly it'd be like worth $400. Um, so you'd obviously have to, just keep it in its box and everything. So they are, from an investment point of view, they still are. If you pick the right products and you hit the right fandom. And obviously there's going back to Magic. Obviously that obviously there's baseball cards. Obviously worth a lot of money. But there were some Magic cards. I know the company called Cartamundi. They're one of the main printers of Magic the Gathering cards. And they've got a factory in Belgium where they print a lot, and they've got a vault there, which even the CEO isn't allowed in, and it's got some really rare cards in this vault. Yeah.
Wow. And because they print, right? I was looking into them actually the other day because for one of the things we do, totally unrelated to what I typically do in software, we have these sort of collectible coins, silver, brass, copper. Very, very nice with little designs. And so we were thinking they have a little certificate of authenticity and all that. So we were thinking we're gonna do the trading card aspect of it, just put in some of that. And so we looked into some of the printers and manufacturers of cards, and some of the things they do, I had no idea. There's these playing card decks that these companies make that are incredible. Just the quality of, I've never seen one in person. Just seeing the video, I was, what? Who uses these?
No, they become, well. There was a huge card. If you've heard of cardistry, which is kind of you often find them on YouTube. They're cardists. It's like magic, but it's all done with manipulation of cards. They'll
Okay.
do something crazy folds, and they need they need really high quality cards to get that sort of smooth fun, and so that's one of the things, quality cards, but also just because cards are, again, a fantastically collectible product. By the Continental Bicycle, which they bought as a brand, and that's obviously a very well-known brand in the US. And huge amounts of people. They're very collectible. You think about the size of a pack of cards. I've got some loads of packs of cards. We used to go to well, I still go, but there was a toy inventor thing every year in the UK, and Carlton used to print some special cards. Just you could only get them at that event. So yeah, they printed like
Oh,
100 decks or 200 decks. So I've got loads of those. Yeah, whether they were worth anything or not, I don't know. But they're very easy to customize a deck of cards, and actually you can do digital printing. So you can literally have one card. You can have a unique card that's digitally printed, but looks like a production quality card. That is literally one off, and they can do that not in a crazy price, because
Hmm.
normally it'd be crazy. So there's very sophisticated equipment. So cards lend themselves very much to um, customization, low runs, collectible decks, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, and the quality, as you say, is fantastic. You put RFID chips in, you can make them smart cards, you can do all those kind of things. So yeah,
I didn't know about the RFID thing in the cards.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
There was a
is.
there was a whole thing with cards interacting um, with iPads. We did a lot because when there's an interesting thing. The toy industry often is quite it sometimes it does really jump on trends. So when the iPod came out, and then the first iPad, a lot of toy companies were all over that. They were doing capacitive figures, which when you put it on the screen, the figure interacted with the environment. We had RFID cards, which obviously, but the reality is the consumer wasn't there. The toy
Hmm.
companies were all over it. We were excited. I worked on loads of products like that, and they were really fun to work on. But the consumer had barely worked out what an iPad was, let alone it could do these things. Now, of course, we realise everyone just understands that an iPad, a smartphone, can do all these millions of different things. But back then, when they first came out, they really didn't know. They didn't really
Hmm.
understand half the things that a smartphone does. It's like a PC. People don't these are 5% of a PC's capabilities. They don't
Right.
really understand half of it. They do emails and they watch YouTube, but that's all they do.
Hmm.
They don't really push it. They've got this huge process and all this memory, and they use like 5% of it. But so the Twitter's just kind of interesting like that. It's like, but you've got to be careful. You've got to take the consumer. You've got to make sure the consumer's with you. You're not just getting carried away because it can be done. Doesn't mean it should be done.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes you have this great idea and you start talking about it and it sounds awesome to you and maybe your team. and, but if you don't actually interact with the final
Yeah.
user of it, the consumer, then it might just flop because they might have actually loved it if it had this little thing and you missed it because you didn't ask.
No,
So
totally.
that's
Yeah.
something interesting in any scenario, not just toys, of
No, of
course,
course.
but
Yeah.
so, what's your take on working by yourself? I know in Heayes Design, you had the design company, but is because some of our audience is small business owners, freelancers, things of that sort. Do you think there's something to gain with collaboration versus being on your own?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think so. Well, the thing is, I work in when you're working with UIP and just the idea, because we work in basically two ways. We consult for companies where, basically work for hire. They want something done, we do it, we get paid. And the other way to work it is on royalties. So we do a lot of the toy industry is very driven by inventors and the sort of professional inventor network where we will design products for them which they didn't even really know they wanted, or they might have an idea of what they want but can't really think of it or don't know where to look. And then we will get a royalty for every sale that is made. So that's all the longer term things. You don't get paid straight away. You've got to wait until the product is made and in sale and you get a royalty check, and that might be 18 months, 2 years down the line. So that can be a kind of a lonely thing. The work for hire is a bit more kind of snappy. It's kind of in and out, in and out. With the royalty stuff's a bit more kind of you got to, and there's a lot of rejection. Like anything, if you're songwriter or an author, or it's like or trying to sell anything to get royalty on is not an easy gig. So um, when I was working for myself, obviously I did a lot of collaborations with other people and companies, and sort of that was great. But I kind of missed. I did that for like 10 years, but I sort of realized I really did miss that kind of creative collaboration. And so I ended up partnering with two other people that I used to work with at Hasbro. We formed a new company, Seven Pips, a few years ago. Because ultimately that was it. Just it wasn't. It was about making better ideas because there's three of you, and you can bounce off each other and be honest with each other, which is a super important part. And not waste time on working on stuff that probably isn't the right thing to work on. And sometimes you can in your own head, even with all your experience, you kind of sometimes go down the wrong avenue. So that helps a lot. And just the general day to day of working with other people and bouncing ideas around, and it's just a lot more fun. It's not always about the money. Yeah, I'm sure
Hmm.
if you're working for yourself and you get all the profits, but there's more to a business than that for sure. And in fact, working the three of us, it is kind of one made five. It's strength in numbers. You can put a different perspective out because we were all known individually in the business. We were all kind of quite well known. But when we pitched ourselves as the three, everybody, oh yeah, that makes sense. I totally get why you guys have done that. And then suddenly it's like, and we're all bringing in slightly different skill sets, of course. Yes, there's a common thread, but we've all got different skill sets. And that's the other great thing. You're always seeing
Hmm.
things from different perspectives. And I think um, as a small business owner, even if you can't take people on yourself, it's really important to find people you can be honest with, find those, not just whether it's a mentor, but sort of a small business owners club or something where you can really talk shop to other people, get their perspectives on it, even if they're not exactly from your world. I think it's so easy for small business owners to become quite insular because it's just running a business. There's so much to deal with, just the
Hmm.
day-to-day grind
Hmm.
of running a business, that you can lose sight of why you're even doing it. It's like, yeah, I'm trying to make a paycheck and keep a roof above my head and that kind of stuff. But it's not, that's the only reason you're doing it. Otherwise, you guys go work for a company, which is probably actually quite a lot easier. Just take a pay, just get a, check every month. Um, it's got to be fun. And it wasn't not having fun, but I realized working as a collective now, we're just having a lot more fun. And the stress is a little bit less as well.
And it's a very interesting approach because many times, depending on where you're coming from, people might see someone like your colleagues as competitors. And so they might be like, oh, yeah, we all work together, but they're my competitor. And then in this approach, you got together, like you were saying, strengthening
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
And it's a different way of handling things. And it's great because now you get the added benefit of each
Yeah.
of you
Yeah.
together, your networks, everything. And it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, and we kind of were competitors, not in an aggressive way, but we all kept in touch with each other, outside of we worked with each other on occasions on certain projects, but we were sort of in competition. And so again that just helps because but that was the nature of the business. The toy companies emerging, like a lot of businesses, you're getting sort of less smaller players, more bigger players, and that has to reflect in the services that go with that. You can't if your customers are basically merging together, there's no point if all the suppliers are just staying as they are because the pond, the supply chain is smaller, the pond is getting bigger. It's like, well, all you're going to do is drive down prices, because there's just going to be more kind of natural competition. So it's much better if those smaller guys girls get together if they can, and they can work together in a kind of harmonious way. Um, but I said it wasn't driven by a financial goal to do this, because it wasn't a big deal that we were in competition with each other. We were all sort of doing okay. It was more just to say, just making better products and making the day to day more an enjoyable process. And yes, the net come out of that probably has been that we haven't got to worry that we've got in competition with each other, but that wasn't the driving force.
And the other part that you mentioned is also very important, I think, because if you are a freelancer or a business owner and you have a small business, in some scenarios, something like this is the ideal route. And in some cases, you can't, and it's just you. And being part of a community, like you said, is another great approach. I was just talking with a client the other day, and we were talking about like the Rotary. In his case, he likes to go to those meetings, breakfasts, or lunches, depending on what time of day you chose, because he meets in this particular case maybe people who have already retired, that had businesses, that have tons of experience, and it's just getting so much knowledge and knowledge transfer from them, and it's a very enjoyable process. But at the same time, you're learning, you're growing, and like you were saying, you're not in isolation. You can talk with people that have are either in the same place as you, have the same issues or wins, or have had them in the
I think
past.
it's really important. And again, it's easy to kind of go, I haven't got time because I've got, and you're right, you never find time for these things, but you really need to because they'll help you become more efficient and they might help change the path of your business even. You might come across someone who wants to invest in you or help you, or they might know someone, you know how it is. You just got to get out there. Networking ultimately is the best use of business time you can make if, you know, you just need to set some time aside to it and do that. And even if you can't even get out and just spend some quality time on LinkedIn, you know, just not just focus. You know, who do I want to talk to? Who can I network with? Who can I? And you know, it really does pay off. It might not pay off straight away, but I'm in my experience, it definitely pays off over time. It
I've
pays off.
I've started to see that. I think you're really on point here. I In our last show we had a retired colonel, the Joe Frankie. He has used LinkedIn since 2004, I believe. And he helps people with this and amongst many other things, executive search and all that. But we're talking about how important it is. And I very recently started actually using LinkedIn. I've had it for years, but it was just there. And since I was never in sort of a corporate space, I just saw people would use it to post new hire. We did this other thing. I wasn't really seeing the power of LinkedIn, but recently I started to get into it. And first of all, once you start using it and connecting with the right people, your feed transforms. It's a whole different thing. You actually learn things, you collaborate, you network. If you're actually building connections, it's so interesting the people you can meet, interact with, learn
Yeah.
from. I've It's been a night and today difference in my experience, at least very recently, just starting to use it as a real networking tool to actually meet people.
It's just tracking down. You know, we all lose track of people, or you know, people we work with, or you know, sometimes like it might be years down the line. We go, I wonder if I could really do with that service. I wonder if those people are still doing that, or I need a marketing person. I need a sales. I wonder what they're doing now because I really enjoy. And you can track them down, and you know that's been transformative. I had literally a case. I hadn't worked with a guy for 10 years. This was a very senior guy at Hasbro. He was like a president of Europe, and now he was running a new company. And you know, he reached out to me, and after 10 years, now he wouldn't have known where to find me, but he obviously saw my posts because we were connected, and I didn't know he was seeing my posts, but he obviously was seeing my posts, or they were just in the background, and I'd pop up every now and then. So I was just kind of in his mind. So when this thing comes up, it's like, oh, I know who I could reach out to. Let me just check. You know, that's it. It's just you're just like being positive prompt. So you need to kind of post, and you don't need to be crazy about it, but I think you just need to be active and think about what you want to say and try and write some interesting stuff and but people might want to listen to or read. Don't keep it too long because people are busy. Just targeted stuff, and then again, just think about what your brand is. What are you trying to sell? You know, people. We all have a very, you know, just really, ultimately, people probably know me as the games guy or the toys guy. Yeah, that's it. Oh, if anything comes across their desk, that's that's how I want them to think about. It can't be any more complicated than that. You know, toy guy, games guy. Oh yeah, someone said, "Oh, I need some." Oh, well, yeah, I know a guy. I know a guy. So
Hmm.
it's got to be super simple. You can't get too sort of deep and heavy about it because people, yeah, they've got other things in their lives to worry about. But if you can keep it simple, then yeah, I think it pays off.
That's an excellent point. And posting, like you're saying, it's so important. Just doing it. It doesn't matter if you feel sometimes it's repetitive because you're talking about the same thing. Well, if that's what you do,
Yeah, no,
talk
totally.
about it because
Yeah,
it's not going to always be the same people who see it. It's going to be
well,
different
that's why
people.
it isn't, as we know, it isn't always the same people. The way the algorithm works.
Hmm.
And I often find it
Hmm.
as a creator too. I often, when I've posted, I actually do it not necessarily out from a sort of ego trip. I don't really care about who likes it or who doesn't. I know some people will see it, but the process of writing, and it just helps you get something out of your head that you think, oh, actually, yeah, as you're writing it, like anything, yeah, I could just do this to myself on just write a letter to myself or something. But the process of doing it on LinkedIn, knowing other people are going to read it, so I'll just make sure it scans properly, it isn't gobbledygook, and just the process of doing that often helps me be quite insightful about things that, oh, actually, I should think a bit more about that, or I should do this or do that. So, yeah, it's part of the creative process actually for me, just writing and posting. So I don't do it very much. I go through phases, but I always try and find a bit of time for it.
And it's always going to matter to someone who is in one part of their journey. And you
Uh,
might not even find out ever,
um,
or you might find out in 10 years that your post actually helped someone. And because we're all in different parts of our journeys and doing different things. And it's like I've seen your posts through time. We met a few years ago out of chance. And I suddenly see your post, but the other day I remember we were talking about create like who manufactures cards and who manufactures toys, and we want to keep it because the whole China US so we want to keep it in the US, and you had for just like that day posted something about a company that's manufacturing here and all that, and I was like, oh wow, that's great, and it brings you back top of mind, but then
yeah,
also you actually gave a lot of value because I saw that company. So yeah, I think it's
and
really.
often that people come, you say, oh, people that you kind of know, but you bump into them at a trade fair or something. It's, oh, yeah, I really like your post. Oh, okay, thanks. Well, whatever. And it's nice, of course, it's nice when you've helped someone, someone's taken some positivity from it because it's a win-win. I enjoyed writing it, and as I was writing it, probably made me think about something, and someone's got a bit of value out of it. And at the end of the day, look, if you're adding value to somebody, ultimately, that's the best marketing tool you can do. Because down
Mhm.
the line, people will probably come back and, you know, repay that value in some way. It might not be monetary, it might be another connection, it might be whatever it be. That's just how the world goes on, doesn't it? I've always felt that kind of, again, don't look for those, don't expect quick wins. I think the problem with today is a lot of people with social media and the way the world works is that there's an expectation that I'm gonna drop you a post on tomorrow. You're going to give me a work. It's not going to work like that. Life has never worked like that, you know. And people, but you sow those seeds, and then people move around, and chances are your world. Not every time, but there'll be enough cross pollination. People will connect. Someone knows somebody. You'll meet them again, and you've built up a trust. You're basically building trust by by writing stuff and commenting and stuff. You're building a trust there that people can go, "Oh, actually, that person, I think they know what they're talking about, so yeah, I'll touch base. So it's not complicated. People try to make it complicated. It really isn't that complicated, but it's just if you were in a village, when if you're all in the same village and you were just going around, you
Mhm.
bumped into the same people at the market every now and then, and they get to know what you did, and eventually you might need a carpenter, you might need someone to do your kitchen. I know the guy, I saw him down the village. It's no different. It's just you're talking about a global village. So, but yeah, just don't expect instant results. I talked to a lot of students about that, and they have a sort of unrealistic expectation. So sometimes it can work. You just, if you say, as you say, it might do, you hit the right person at the right time, maybe those magic paths will cross and you say just what that person wanted to hear. Anyway, we've got way off topic on LinkedIn, but no, obviously I think for small business owners is an important thing, basic networking. Obviously, that's what we got talking about. So I think just try and find quality time for that, even if it's an hour a week. Just some time that you're not doing anything else. You're just collaborating, trying to connect, and if you can find a bit more time to find local people around you, um, then that's great as well.
I what you said about doing the posting sort of as part of your process, I think also applies for many people. And this could be LinkedIn, this could be on your blog, on your website, wherever, YouTube. I've found it very helpful. And I myself, I'm guilty of forgetting, getting too busy, not doing it, etc. But the times that I've done it, they pay off because there's one that has happened more than once in the past years where maybe I wrote an article about something, how to change, I don't know, run a specific code on a specific software that we're doing, right? Maybe I published it, completely forgot about it. Years later, I'm doing the exact same thing, and I'm like, how does this work? And search on Google, find the answer, like, oh, okay, good answer. And it's my website. I find my answer from my past self. And I'm like, oh well, thank you,
That's quite
because
funny.
I had completely forgotten about it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, even if it's just an exercise of
A record of your thoughts, and
record.
yeah, no, totally. I think it's you're right, and that's happened to me before as well. Well, I've done not quite to that degree, but something I've written about and I've forgotten about, and I've come back and sort of found it. So yeah, that's how you do it.
I I love some of the things that you were talking about with the game mechanic and the instructions because I've seen products. You could love a brand. For instance, I don't want to bash it because I don't remember if it's exactly this, but for example, we really love the Haunted Mansion at Disney. We're big fans of a lot of things Disney. And I think it was something regarding the Haunted Mansion. There was this game that came out. We were really excited, obviously just because of the IP. We're like, oh yeah, let's get it. We bought it on pre-order. We get it. Open the instructions. Couldn't figure it out. It was just so confusing, and we did never played it.
No, no.
It just
Honestly, it is that obviously instructions are, people bemoan things like the IKEA instructions, and
oh yeah.
the problem is most people don't read. I am the worst. In fact, quick story. I bought a new cooker hood the other week, and I got it out of the box. Yeah, I know how to put this up. I don't need to read the instructions. And of course, there's me sort of like, well, stupid designer has designed this. They haven't really thought about this. And of course, what Susan's, my wife, says, have you read the instructions? I went, I know how to put this. Have you read You're always moaning at people reading this. Yeah, I'll read the instructions. Of course, I read the instructions. Like, oh, yeah, I've done it. So I am no angel in that respect. But games, particularly, yes. I was talking about Monopoly deal instructions. Look,
hmm
people, like exactly with my cook hood analogy, people come into things, products, with a knowledge. We all like to think we're a bit smarter than the average person. Oh, I don't need I don't need to read those. I know what I'm doing. I can see this is easy. Half an hour later, we've got the wrong thing in the wrong place. And so you've got to make instructions user friendly. They've got to feel part of the experience. They mustn't feel like a chore. A lot of instructions feel like you look at them and go, oh, I don't want to read that. It's boring. So you've got to make them feel fun. And, obviously video games are really good at this because they enable to guide you through they don't really tell you. You just start playing and then they interject knowing what you're doing right or wrong. So that's perfect. Obviously with an analog product, you can't do that. So rules are a huge part of games, and most companies, to be honest, don't spend they because it's the bit of paper in the box. They don't spend the time on it that they should do, and sometimes they can be the most time consuming part of the whole thing. More than the graphics, more than game design, more than anything, is actually getting rules that people want to read, can understand, because ultimately if you have a bad experience, your Haunted Mansion, you never played it, well, my guess is you're not going to recommend that game, are you, to anyone else? Whereas if you had read it and the rules had been well written, and maybe the game was a great game, the rules
hmm
were a barrier to you experiencing that game. If you just sat down with the game design, you might have had a great game and then recommended that product. So it's very, very short sighted to skimp on instructions. Whatever product you're selling, don't skimp on the instructions. Don't go, oh, I just need to save a few cents. I know we costed them in color, but let's just do them in black and white because that's fine. Don't do that. Always make the instructions, spend love on the instructions. Make sure you test them with people who don't know the product, who have never seen the product, because then you'll really know if they make any sense, because you all know this product. And it's very easy to test him around the office. Oh yeah, he's made great. He's a great, yeah, super. Well, great. You want to know what you're talking about. Give it to someone who's never seen your product before. What's this? I don't understand this. And so yeah, whatever product you're doing, most of the time there's some kind of instructions, whether it's an app, whether it's a website, there's some kind of instruction, even if it's a few lines, but craft that message, spend time on it, because that is your gateway to the experience of your product. If people don't get past that, you ain't got an experience or a product. It's never going to get recommended. So, yeah.
That's excellent advice. And it does work for websites in particular a lot. So you're building a site, you're building an app or something. And the onboarding is just an afterthought for
Totally.
a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just like, oh, it's ready. Okay, now let's add these little walkthrough things that everyone hates. And they're fine. But most of the time, if you need those, it's because the interface wasn't clear
Totally.
enough.
And they're done in a way that's like, oh, we've got it. It's like people do it. It's like, oh, God, do the onboarding. Because it's like, and they're just done because it feels like it's a tick box exercise. It's like, no, it's like the first thing people are going to find. We all talk about physical product unboxing with an iPhone and, how it's all lovely and it feels, of course, that unboxing experience is super important. Unboxing in the digital, and it's the same thing. You're unboxing the experience, not the physical thing, but the experience you're unboxing. So you've got to spend the time and the love on it. And again, yeah, as you said, it's just not. Most companies do not spend that time or love on it.
I think many people just don't know about it because they haven't been in an industry where it is done well. And it's good that we all hear it because yeah, I mean, there's some games that it's a completely new game, very complicated, but then you get the little piece of paper, you're like, oh, huh, cool, let's play, and you just get going because they spent the time.
The ultimate thing, obviously, is to have no rules. Of course, the ultimate thing is to have no instructions in any product. That would be the goal. In games, it's incredibly hard because it's like, how, how do you do that? How do you? It's
Hmm.
really. I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's just incredibly hard. But obviously there are products which you could, if you design them with a bit more thought, you might be able to eradicate the instructions because you're going with the also about going back to this Monopoly deal about what people come in with baggage. So people come in with how they think these things should work. If you design it into how most people are going to think how this thing naturally should work. Don't try and design a clip that clips in a weird way when everybody thinks well, it should do that. Oh, why doesn't it do that? Oh, why is it doing that? Where's the instructions? Well, as opposed to, if it just sometimes you can eradicate instructions. And the worst thing also is to people say, I will cover off in the instructions. That is when anybody says, I will just cover off in the user guide, we'll cover off in the instructions. Red flag. Red flag. you know. So yeah, watch that as well.
That's amazing. Oh, this has been really insightful, Richard. I have so many other questions, but I don't want to take more of your
But
time.
perhaps we'll do a part two sometime.
Yes, that would be fantastic. There's so many things that I want to ask about other aspects of the business, but I think we covered a lot and I want to get you back to your day. Is there a place where people can find you if they're interested in learning more, or perhaps they're in the space and they need to reach out to a designer, inventor, etc.?
Well, as I said, probably LinkedIn, if I'm honest. Just Richard Heayes, Heayes. It's a strange spelling. I've got
Mhm.
some illiterate forebears who spell probably Hayes wrong, and so but it's great for getting web domains and getting found easily online if they spell your name properly. So Heayes. And yeah, you can drop me a message on LinkedIn, or it's got my email there. You can connect with me there. So probably the better than Twitter.
Excellent.
I don't tend to use X very much these days. So.
Mm. Yeah, and I'll put it in the show notes as well so people can find you. And for 7 pips, is that something who would reach out to 7 pips as a company? Would that be like specifically a toy company, a game company,
Yeah,
or
so
is it
toy
also
and game.
for startups or
Yeah, toy and game, but anybody who's, we sort of do a lot of essentially anything in the play space in the broadest possible sense of that. We're all basically industrial designers, but with a kind of a huge knowledge of the play industry. So where we're looking at kind of areas adjacent to toys and games as well. But yeah, Jim, that's our kind of core skill set. But hey, if you want to talk about instructions as well, we can certainly help you with the user instructions.
Amazing. I'm sure we all need that.
Cool.
All right, Richard. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll talk soon. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Great. Take care. Bye.